Hi, this is Dr. Chapar. In this video, we are going to discuss ABC analysis or inventory stratification. Inventory stratification dates back to 1950s when GE started using sales volume, cash flows, lead time, and stock out to basically classify items. And the idea was you categorize the most important items in your A category, and then the lesser impact products goes to B and C item categories. Inventory stratification is based on the Pareto's observation that 20% of the people in Italy had 80% of the land in his time. And objective here is to basically eliminate very little influence items with very little influence and focus on vital few. It is mostly known as 80-20 rule, but these 80 and 20s are not written on a stone or somewhere, so you can actually change it based on your situation. And in today's example, we will probably use different numbers to calculate the ABC classification. The idea, again, you can use any number when you need it. The idea behind the inventory stratification is to identify SKUs, stock keeping units, that management should focus on. And this is done through prioritization. And you just create some logical groups, and you need to adjust these groups as time passes to make sure that it depicts the latest situation in your company. In general, A items are very few high impact items. They require the most managerial attention because they are crucial for our business, and you need to make a lot of exceptions. Right? B items are the second category. These are many moderate items. You can still manage with automation. Some rules can be used for A items as well, but you need to create too many exceptions in that case. So it's easier to focus on A items in a different way. And C items are basically the largest proportion of items that make the minor impact for your business. You try to automate these items as much as possible to reduce the management time and attention, right? You can classify inventories based on criticality to operations, how profitable items are, the dollars spent times the item consumption rate, transaction dollar, value to criticality, and multiple dimensions. Today we will actually see how to use multiple factors to do an ABC analysis. Now, when we talk about the ABC analysis, there are two different ways to classify item or rank them actually. One of them is the relative ranking. Basically, in this one, you rank the items based on their importance compared to all other items in the analysis. And the other method is absolute ranking. This time, you predetermine the scales, and then basically you say who hits that scale, and then it become ABC item. You can think of ABC absolute ranking for your grade in this course. For example, the syllabus says if you get over 90% of the grade, you get the A in this class. So that's an absolute ranking basically. There might be 10 people or 100 people above 90%, and all of them will get A. So the number of people getting an A in the class is not related to how many people in that category. On the other hand, for relative ranking, basically you determine what percentage of the class, for example, can get an A. That could be perhaps a curve, grade based on the curve, right? You could say only 5% of the class can get an A in this class. That means the top ranked 5 people would get an A. It is possible that those top ranked people or students would be getting an average grade of 70 or 99. It doesn't really matter. If they are the top 5, they are going to get the A in the class. Depending on the factors you are using, you may be using combination of them. For example, GMROI, gross margin return on investment, usually is an absolute ranking item. You basically decide what are the ranges for ABC items, and then you rank the items looking at their GMROI values. For example, if you determine that GMROI over 200% is an A item, and you just compare every item to see if they are in the A category. All right. Now, before you start an ABC analysis, you need to determine the purpose of ABC analysis. For example, are you making this ABC analysis for inventory management or warehouse management to decide where to put the items? Or is it for sales? And these basically impacts the factors you are going to consider. If you are focusing on sales, perhaps sales dollars or quantity might be a good metric, as well as GMROI that I mentioned earlier. But if this is about the warehouse management, perhaps you are going to look into the hits. For example, hit is basically how many times an item been requested, right? If item is being requested more frequently, then you have to put that item close to the picking areas, so that becomes an A item for warehouse process. Then for each of these factors, you need to decide whether you are going to use absolute or a relative ranking. Then determine the interval. We discussed 80-20 rule, but that is not something fixed, so you can look into the data and make some adjustment. Then you need to basically validate, perform an ABC analysis. After the analysis, you need to validate the results. What that means is, perhaps you get an item and it says this is an A item, but you know that based on your experience and the data collected, it cannot be an A item. So you make sure that the data is right and the analysis basically indicates the reality. For example, when you are trying to validate the result, you may see that you put a very large portion of the items in A category because your range is very large, right? Then you may need to basically shorten that range. You may also see that some items are falling in a B category, but you like to consider them as an A item. So this is the time basically to manage those exceptions. And finally, over time, as you work in the business, your situation may change. The factors for an item might change, so you need to update your ABC analysis on a regular basis. I think anything between 6 months to a couple of years could be reasonable, depending on how frequently you are selling or operating in the business. Now, during the analysis, for each factor, you need to sort the items from the best to the worst, right? If we are talking about sales dollar, best item is the highest sales dollar, and the worst one is the least one you generate. If we are talking about the sales quantity, again, highest quantity is better than lowest quantity, and so forth. If you are working with an absolute ranking for this factor, then you just basically look into the ranges of those ranking categories and then decide if this item is going to category A, B, C, or D, right? If you have a category D. If it is a relative ranking, then it's a little bit more work because you have to calculate ratios and cumulative ratios, and then the classification based on those ratios, cumulative ratios actually, right? And sometimes we may need to consider more than one factor. In those situations, basically what you do is you create an ABC analysis for factor 1, factor 2, and then combine these two and create a final ABC analysis considering the weights for each factor, right? Now we are going to go through an example, and this example, we have two factors, sales dollars and sales quantity, and there are 7 items, and we are going to perform an ABC analysis, right? Before we start, I'm assuming that items generating the top 60% value are A items, and the next 30% are B items, and the remaining are C items, right? Just note that one. Now, when I do the ABC analysis for sales, I'm also gonna do relative ranking, by the way. We are sorting from the best item to the worst. The best item is in this case item 3 with $820 sales revenue. The second one is the 7 with $650, and the worst item is item 1 with $250 sales revenue. If you add up these sales numbers, you end up with $3,090, right? The ratio is basically 820 divided by 390, 0.265, basically almost 26.5% of the sales come from item 3, and then 21% comes from item 7, and about 8% of the sales is generated from item 1. The cumulative ratio is basically you add up the ratios as you go. For example, for item 3, cumulative ratio is 0.265 because item 3 is by only itself. It is the highest ranked item. Then we go to the item 2. In this case, item 7, I'm sorry, rank 2 item. To calculate the cumulative ratio, basically we add 0.265 and 0.210 together, and you end up with 47.6% or 0.476. What it means is item 3 and 7 together basically generate 47.6% of the sales, right? Then you go at the fourth item 4, I'm sorry, your sales number goes to 60.8%, and then when you end up with those other cumulative ratio numbers. Now, once you calculate these cumulative ratios, you can create the ABC analysis. If you remember, top 60% are A items, next 30 is B, and the rest is C item. So I'm gonna look at the cumulative ratios and keep an eye on that 60 and 90% numbers. So first item is A item, item 3. Item 7 is at 47.6%, so it's still an A item. The fourth item is 60.8%. Now, in a real life situation, you may consider this one as an A item as well, but in the class, we are gonna be very strict about the number that we are getting. So it is about 60%, and I'm gonna say this is not an A item, it is now a B item because it falls between 60% and 90%, right? Similarly, item 5 and item 2 are B items. Then when I add the item 6, I get to 91.9%. That is a C item because it is above 90%. And finally, item 1 ends up being the last item and a C item. All right. Now I have the ABC analysis for sales dollar. I'm going to do the similar thing for sales quantity. All right. These were the quantity numbers. Again, the first thing is I'm going to sort them from the best one to the worst one and do the similar calculation. All right. Best item in terms of sales quantity is item 1, and the worst one is 320. If you add up all those numbers, you end up with 5,150 units, right? So item 1 by itself is 25.7% of the sales quantity. Then item 7 comes with 18.3%. Item 5 is 14.1%, and item 4, the last one, is 6.2%. Similarly, I'm going to calculate the cumulative ratio values, and then once it is done, I'll get to ABC values. In this case, item 1, 7, 5, all of them are below 60%, so all of them are A items. Item 6 and 2, they are between 60 and 90%, so they are B items. And finally, item 3 and 4 are above the 90% value, so they are C items. Now, I have a classification, and this classification says item 1 based on sales dollar is a C item, and based on sales quantity, it's an A item. Item 2 is BB. item 3 is an AC, and item 7 is AA. Now the question is, I cannot just go and talk to my manager saying this is a C and A item for item 1, or for the second one it's a BB and item 7 is an AA, because I could have 5 different factors at the end, and it would be a long AABCA kind of a classification. So what we need to do is basically first convert these letters to numbers so we can do math, and then define a relative weight for sales dollars and sales quantity, right? So in this exercise, I'm going to assume that if an item is an A item, it gets 5 points. If it is a B item, it gets 3. And if it is a C item, it gets 1 point, right? Now, I need to be just consistent. What I mean with that is A needs to be higher point than B, and B needs to be higher point than C. Also, don't do like A to A5, B3, and then C 0.1. So try to keep the scale kind of relatively leveled or steady. And then we are given the information that sales dollar is 3 times more important than sales quantity, right? So given this information, we are going to perform the final ABC analysis and create the ABC classification for these 7 items, right? So weight, when it says sales dollar is 3 times more important than sales quantity, I just put the 1 for sales quantity as a weight and 3 as the weight of sales dollar. I could choose 0.25 and 0.75 or any other number. It doesn't matter. I just need to be consistent with that information, sales dollar being 3 times more than sales quantity. And then these numbers for sales dollar and sales quantity, basically, if an item is a C item, I put a 1 point. If it's a B item, I put 3 points. And if it's an A item, it is a 5 point, right? So that is that information between this figure and this figure. So all the letters here are converted to numbers here, right? Next step is calculating the weights or weighted points. So what we are going to do is basically multiply the sales weight of 3 with the sales point an item received plus 1 point of sales quantity weight by the sales quantity points that item has. For the first item, the weight is 3 for sales dollar, and this item is a C item for sales dollar. So 3 times 1 plus 1 times 5, which is equal to 8. For the second item, it is 3 times 3 plus 1 times 3, which is 12. And for the item 7, it is an A item for sales dollar and an A item for sales quantity. So it is 3 times 5 plus 1 times 5, total of 20. Now, once I calculated these values, weighted values, now I'm going to go back to my initial step of sorting these products or these items from best to worst. In this case, the best item is the one with the highest point, and the worst item is the one with the lowest point. In this exercise, basically item 7 is the best item with 20 points, and item 6 is the worst item with only 6 points. Right. So here's the similar table that we had earlier. Item 7 is the highest ranked item, and 6 is the lowest ranked item. Similar to earlier classification, we are going to calculate a ratio and the cumulative ratios, right? The total weighted point is 86, so I'm dividing everything by 86 and getting the ratios, and then doing the cumulative ratios. I made change here, went from 3-digit accuracy to 4 digits. And the reason was when I did the 3-digit, I ended up like 1.01. So I just wanted to avoid that one and show it as a 1. But honestly, I could round up one of the, or round down one of the numbers and get the same point. I just choose this way because it was easy on Excel, right? So once you get the cumulative ratios, you are going to look into the values and decide whether an item is an A, B, C items. Remember, top 60% are A item, 60 to 90 are B item, and above 90 are going to be the C items, right? So 23.26%, 46.86%, and 83.14%, all three are about lower than 60%, so those are my A items. Then items 2 and 4, they are in the B category, and finally item 1 and 6 are in the C category, right? So that is how we do the ABC analysis. And this final list is that item 1 is a C item, item 2 is a B item, item 3 is an A item, 4 is a B item, 5 is an A item, 6 is a C item, and 7 is an A item, right? And this concludes this video.